What if the most popular man in Hollywood, a man who made studios rich beyond imagination, a man who had the world eating out of the palm of his hand, simply vanished overnight? Not retired, not fired, not caught in a scandal, just gone, erased, wiped from the conversation like he had never existed at all. No press release, no farewell tour, no explanation of any kind. Just one day his phone stopped ringing, the script stopped showing up, and the entire machinery of Hollywood pretended he had never mattered. What if I told you that this wasn't a coincidence? What if I told you it was deliberate, calculated, and carried out by people who had the power to do exactly that and get away with it completely? What if I told you that the man who once survived a literal near-death experience on a film set, who pushed through injuries that would have put most people in a wheelchair, who built one of the most beloved careers of his generation with nothing but raw talent and relentless work ethic, was quietly destroyed not by his own failures, but by someone else's hunger for power? And what if I told you that the most shocking part of this entire story isn't even what happened to him? It's that the man responsible for it actually wrote about what he did in his own memoir, published it under his own name, apparently convinced that the world would simply never notice or never care. His name is Brendan Fraser. And for nearly 20 years, Hollywood did everything it could to make sure you forgot about him. This is the story they never wanted told. To understand what was taken from Brendan Fraser, you first have to understand what he had built. And I mean really understand it, not just the box office numbers, not just the critical reviews, but the human reality of how hard it is to build what he built and how completely it was destroyed. Fraser arrived in Hollywood in the early 90s with something that sounds simple, but is actually extraordinarily rare in that industry. He was genuine, not performing genuineness, not strategically cultivating an approachable image for marketing purposes, actually authentically, disarmingly real. In a town populated almost entirely by people running carefully polished versions of themselves, Fraser walked in and just was himself. Warm, physical, funny without trying to be, committed to the work in a way that made even absurd material feel worth your time. His early films told two completely different stories, and he told both of them equally well. He played a defrosted caveman stumbling through modern suburban life, and he played a prep school student navigating identity and anti-Semitism alongside a young Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Two wildly different registers, two wildly different audiences, and Fraser inhabited both with complete ease. That kind of range is not something you manufacture. It either exists in a person or it doesn't. In Brendan Fraser, it existed naturally. Then he made George of the Jungle. And honestly, the fact that he agreed to make that film tells you everything about who he was as a performer. On paper, it was career suicide. A Disney parody of Tarzan, broadly physical, deliberately silly, the kind of project that serious actors passed on immediately. Fraser didn't just accept it. He committed to it completely. He found the heart of the character. He made you root for someone who spent most of the movie running into trees. The film made 3 times its production budget. Studios didn't just take notice. They started circling. Because here was something genuinely valuable in a business built on unreliable commodities. A star who could do anything, who audiences trusted regardless of the material, who showed up and did the work without complaint. But none of that, not the range, not the charm, not the box office success, nothing prepared anyone for what he delivered in The Mummy. Released in May of 1999, The Mummy was the kind of film that required a very specific kind of performer at its center. It was large-scale and globe-trotting and relentlessly physical. It needed someone who could anchor enormous action sequences without losing the comedy, carry the dramatic weight without abandoning the fun, and make you genuinely care about a character who spent most of the film running from ancient supernatural monsters in the Egyptian desert. Fraser didn't just meet those requirements. He exceeded them in a way that made the whole thing look effortless, which is the greatest possible lie a truly skilled performer can tell. Because what was actually happening behind the scenes was something almost nobody knew about at the time. Filming took place partly in the Sahara Desert. Real isolation, temperatures that don't negotiate, sandstorms severe enough to shut down production for days at a stretch. The physical demands of the shoot were extraordinary, and Fraser pushed through all of them without a word of complaint, because that's who he was. But the moment that most completely defines what kind of performer Brendan Fraser was, and what the film industry was willing to do to get what it wanted, happened during the filming of an execution scene early in the film. The scene required Fraser's character to be hanged. A mock hanging, controlled, with safety measures in place. But the director wanted authenticity. He wanted the tension in Fraser's face to be real. So he asked for another take. And then he asked for the rope to be tightened. Fraser had a feeling in his gut. He knew something was off. But he said yes anyway, because in the world he was operating in, you didn't question the director. You didn't push back. You surrendered yourself to the process, or you risked your entire career. What happened next was not a close call. The rope tightened, the camera rolled, and Brendan Fraser lost consciousness on set. His doctors told him afterward that he had been technically dead for somewhere between 12 and 14 seconds. 12 to 14 seconds. He came back. He finished the film. And when he went on late-night television to promote The Mummy, he turned the entire story into a joke, deflecting with humor, making audiences laugh, never once letting them see how close it had actually been. He protected the production over his own safety. Then he protected his image over his own trauma. That pattern, swallowing the hard things and moving forward, choosing the performance over the honest accounting of what the performance was costing him, would define the next 2 decades of his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The Mummy became a global phenomenon. It earned nearly $500 million worldwide on a production budget of roughly $80 million. Brendan Fraser was, by every measurable metric, one of the most bankable stars on the planet. The sequel performed at a similar level. His personal life appeared equally solid. He was married. He had a growing family. From the outside, it was the picture of a life completely intact. But underneath that picture, two things were happening simultaneously that would eventually converge into something devastating. First, the physical toll of those films was becoming irreversible. Every stunt, every physical sequence, every take where he pushed past the boundaries of what a human body is designed to withstand was accumulating into damage that no amount of recovery time could fully undo. He started what he called building an exoskeleton just to get through production days. Ice packs, compression gear, padding hidden beneath his costumes. He was quietly falling apart while the cameras were rolling, and the studio system wasn't particularly concerned because studios don't care about your body. They care about the footage. That dynamic, the expectation that Fraser would give everything and ask for nothing in return, was about to extend far beyond any film set. And second, an encounter was coming. One that would happen at a lunch in Beverly Hills in the summer of 2003, at the absolute peak of his career, that would cost him 20 years of his life. Before we get to that lunch, and we are getting there, you need to understand the organization at the center of what happened next. Because without understanding how that organization worked, and how much power it actually held, what happened to Brendan Fraser looks like bad luck. It wasn't bad luck. It was architecture. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association had existed since 1943. On its face, it was straightforward enough, a group of international journalists based in Los Angeles covering the entertainment industry for non-American media markets. They created their own award ceremony the following year, a small annual dinner that would eventually grow into something called the Golden Globes. For decades, the Globes were treated as a minor event. The Academy Awards were the real prize. The Globes were a warm-up act, a chance for the industry to celebrate itself informally before the serious business of Oscar season began. Then NBC picked up the broadcast rights in the late 80s, and everything changed. Ratings climbed, viewership expanded, and suddenly a Golden Globe nomination wasn't just a footnote in a studio press kit. It was a career-defining moment. A win could translate directly into tens of millions of additional dollars at the box office. The timing of the ceremony, held weeks before Oscar nomination ballots were due, made it the perfect launching platform for an entire awards campaign. Winning a Globe didn't just feel important. It was important. It moved money. And whoever controlled the Golden Globes effectively controlled the momentum of Hollywood itself during the most commercially consequential period of the year. That control sat with approximately 90 journalists. 90 people whose votes could transform a mid-budget film into an awards contender or quietly bury a performance that deserved recognition. 90 people who could be courted, flattered, entertained, and in some cases quietly compensated in ways that were never formally acknowledged. Does a system like that sound designed for fairness? Or does it sound designed for manipulation? Because the manipulation was not subtle, and it was not secret, at least not to anyone paying attention inside the industry. Studios began allocating serious resources specifically to court association members. Publicists staged red carpet appearances to maximize member face time. Consultants charged studios up to $45,000 simply for strategic advice on how to work the room at industry events. Bonuses of $20,000 were paid for nominations, $30,000 more if a film actually won. Actors were deployed to private events, sitting down with journalists who were not powerful people in the traditional Hollywood sense, making them feel interesting and valued and important, because when a global movie star makes you feel like the most fascinating person in the room, your vote tends to reflect that feeling. This was the machine, methodical, largely invisible, almost entirely without accountability. And at its center, for much of its most powerful era, was a man named Philip Burke. Burke had been a member of the association for 33 years. He served as president for 8 separate terms. He was the kind of man who understood instinctively that in Hollywood, invisibility is its own form of power. The less famous you are, the harder you are to attack. Burke didn't need to be recognizable. He needed to be feared. And the story of what happened to a journalist named Nick Douglas demonstrated exactly why people feared him. Douglas was a member of the association, a writer for a small entertainment publication. In 2004, he was suspended from the organization for 2 violations that in any normal professional environment would barely register as incidents. He had sold a photograph of himself with an actor to a tabloid for $50. Members weren't permitted to profit from the professional access the association provided. He was also accused of taking some unopened beers from a studio reception, $50 and a few drinks. For that, Nick Douglas was cut off from every press junket, every celebrity interview, every professional opportunity that flowed through the association's extensive network. In a single administrative decision, his livelihood was eliminated. A few days before the Golden Globe nominations were announced the following year, Nick Douglas was found dead. His editor-in-chief was direct when asked for comment. He stated clearly that the association had taken away a man's livelihood and that this had led directly to what followed. When Philip Burke was asked whether there was any connection between the suspension and Douglas's death, his response was cold and precise. He acknowledged that the association had suspended people before for actions deemed harmful to the organization. He said he didn't believe the suspension and the death were causally related. Not a single word of regret. Not one moment of reflection. Just an institution protecting its image. And precisely that, is the world Brendan Fraser was navigating when he attended a luncheon at the Beverly Hills Hotel in the summer of 2003. A world where the wrong enemy could end your career with a phone call. Where the rules existed to shield those in power, not those beneath them. Where silence was the only safe response to almost anything. It was a routine industry gathering, the kind of event that stars at Fraser's level were expected to attend, move through professionally, and depart without incident. Burke was there. As Fraser was leaving, he crossed paths with Burke and extended his hand for what he expected to be a standard goodbye. What followed was not a handshake. According to Fraser, Burke reached around him and touched his body in a way that was unmistakably deliberate, unmistakably violating. Fraser described the moment in precise detail years later. The physical sensation, the immediate confusion, the instinct to pull away from something his body registered as deeply wrong before his mind had fully processed what was happening. He said he felt like a child in that moment. He said there was a ball in his throat. He thought he might cry. He described feeling as though someone had thrown invisible paint on him, something placed on his body that he couldn't remove regardless of how hard he tried. He left the event alone. He didn't go to the police. He didn't call his publicist. He drove away from the Beverly Hills hotel carrying something heavy and formless, trying to organize an experience that resisted organization. That night he told his wife. And then for a very long time, he told almost no one else. Think about what that means for a moment. A man at the peak of his physical and professional power, globally recognized, financially secure, operating inside an industry that publicly celebrated him. And he still felt he had no safe space to bring what had just happened to him. No channel that felt genuinely safe. No avenue that felt protected. What does that tell you about the system he was living inside? Fraser's representatives eventually reached out to the association on his behalf. The ask was minimal. Not a lawsuit. Not a public statement. Just an acknowledgement. Just someone saying clearly that what happened was wrong. What they received in return was a masterclass in institutional self-protection. Burke's written response admitted nothing. The language was engineered with the specific purpose of appearing to say something while actually saying nothing at all. If anything I did caused offense, I apologize for that. Not I was wrong. Not I am sorry for what I did. A conditional construction designed to make the offense hypothetical, to make the harm theoretical, to protect the person delivering the apology from having to actually own what the apology was for. The association separately contacted Fraser's team with a promise. He would never be required to be in the same room as Philip Burke again. Burke later denied that any such promise had ever been made. The organization refused to comment publicly. And then the silence began. Not dramatically. Not all at once. These things never work that way. The phone calls slowed. The callbacks thinned. The leading roles that should have been the natural continuation of everything Fraser had built simply didn't materialize. He kept working, because stopping felt like surrender, and because he had a family to provide for. A supporting role in a film that would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. Television appearances. A third installment of the Mummy franchise that performed significantly below its predecessors. But the trajectory had reversed. And for years, Fraser couldn't fully understand why. That is one of the most devastating things about being blacklisted. Nobody tells you. There is no official notification. No industry memo. No meeting where someone looks you in the eyes and explains what's happening. The machine just quietly builds walls around you, and you stand on the other side of those walls trying to figure out what you did wrong. Fraser later described this period as trying to move through fog. He was still showing up, still working, still trying to be the professional he had always been. But something essential had been removed from him, not only professionally but internally. The assault had destabilized something deep and structural in his psychology. He found himself becoming more withdrawn, more isolated, less able to access the version of himself that had walked onto film sets with complete natural confidence. He talked about battling depression. He spoke about memory problems, long stretches of time that became hazy and indistinct as his mind tried to process and contain something it couldn't fully categorize. Trauma stored in the body has its own timetable and its own logic. Meanwhile, his physical condition continued to deteriorate from the accumulated damage of years of unchecked punishment on set. Multiple spinal surgeries, a partial knee replacement, vocal cord repair. He spent the better part of 7 years moving between hospitals and recovery rooms. Spending money, he was increasingly struggling to earn on procedures to address damage that the industry had helped create and then completely walked away from. The man who had survived a near hanging in the Sahara Desert, who had built what he called an exoskeleton just to keep filming, who had swallowed every difficult thing without complaint and kept moving forward, was being quietly taken apart, piece by piece in private. And Hollywood had already moved on. It had decided the story of Brendan Fraser was over and filed it accordingly. By the early years of the following decade, Fraser had become something the entertainment press loved to flatten into a punchline. A photograph circulated online that Fraser himself would later describe as having been taken at one of his lowest points. Sloped shoulders, eyes that looked like they were carrying something invisible and unbearable. The internet labeled it Sad Brendan Fraser. It became a meme. It was shared millions of times. People found it funny because celebrity culture at its worst transforms human suffering into content without ever stopping to ask what caused it. Nobody was asking why he looked that way. Nobody was following that thread to its actual source. Because following that thread would have required a level of genuine curiosity and basic empathy that the meme cycle is structurally designed to prevent. He wasn't a person in those moments of mass sharing. He was an image. A cautionary tale about faded glory. A reminder that Hollywood will use you and discard you. What the people sharing that image didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was exactly who had done the using. And then Philip Burke did something that can only be described as the most staggering act of arrogance in a story that is not short on arrogance. He wrote a memoir. The book was called With Signs and Wonders. And in it, Burke detailed his decades at the helm of the association with a candor that suggested he had never once seriously entertained the possibility that accountability might eventually arrive. He wrote about the organization's inner workings. He addressed various controversies that had attached themselves to his tenure. He was, by multiple accounts, remarkably open for a man whose entire professional power had depended on opacity. And then, almost incomprehensibly, he wrote about Brendan Fraser. Burke framed his version of the 2003 incident as a clarification. He claimed that during the encounter at the luncheon, the subject of a separate rumor had come up, an allegation that Fraser had pinched a female association president at a previous Golden Globe ceremony. Burke's account stated that to demonstrate how minor and easily misinterpreted such physical contact could be, he had reached over and pinched Fraser's bottom. To demonstrate, he touched another person's body without consent, and without warning to prove a point about why touching a person's body without consent wasn't a serious act. The circular logic was breathtaking in its obliviousness. Burke wasn't defending himself. He was confessing in print, apparently genuinely unaware that the story he was telling about himself, reaching out and grabbing someone without permission to argue that grabbing someone without permission wasn't meaningful, was not the exoneration he believed it to be. He had admitted it. In his own words. In a published book. Under his own name. The problem was timing. When Burke's memoir was published, the cultural and institutional machinery that would eventually force people to reckon seriously with this kind of story simply wasn't yet in place. The book received limited coverage. The passage about Fraser was noted in a handful of entertainment publications and then largely dropped. Burke was not a famous man. His readership was small. And the industry had spent decades training everyone inside it to look away from exactly this category of story when it involved exactly this category of powerful person. Then 2017 arrived. And the Me Too movement brought with it an investigative reckoning that exposed Harvey Weinstein, the same Harvey Weinstein who had spent years cultivating and legitimizing the association, as someone whose predatory behavior had been an open secret inside Hollywood for longer than most people wanted to acknowledge publicly. The reporting broke something open in a way that previous reporting hadn't quite managed to. Survivors who had been silent for years began to speak. The industry's elaborate architecture of silence, complicity, and institutional protection was being examined in public daylight for the first time at real scale. For Brendan Fraser, watching this unfold was deeply personal and deeply complicated. He later spoke about seeing women he knew, people he considered colleagues and friends, standing up and telling their stories with a kind of courage he hadn't yet found in himself. He watched the movement build and felt something shift inside him. Something that had been fixed in place for 15 years began, slowly, to loosen. By 2018, he was ready. In a private conversation with a journalist from GQ, conducted significantly while Fraser was caring for his horse, far removed from the performance spaces of Hollywood, he told the full story for the first time. The luncheon, Burke, the assault, the conditional non-apology, the silence that had followed him for 15 years like a shadow he couldn't leave behind. He spoke quietly, carefully, the way people speak when they have been carrying something for a very long time and are finally, cautiously, setting it down somewhere they hope is safe. He acknowledged that he couldn't say with absolute certainty that his career's trajectory had been directly shaped by Burke and the association. He recognized that blacklisting is designed to be invisible, that no one announces it to your face. But he described the silence that followed the 2003 encounter as deafening. He chose that word deliberately. In an industry where silence is always a message, deafening is not a description. It's an indictment. He talked about the people who had inspired him to finally speak, deflecting credit toward others as he always had, insisting they had been far more courageous than he was. But the act of telling the truth, naming a powerful man, describing a serious violation, doing it without legal management or publicist control or any guarantee of being believed, that took real courage. After 15 years of carrying it alone, he put it down. Philip Burke's public response was exactly what anyone who had followed his career would have predicted. Fraser's decline, Burke stated, had occurred through no fault of the association. Cold, precise, entirely defensive. But the industry was listening differently now than it had when the book came out. The response to Fraser's interview was immediate. Fans who had grown up watching him understood suddenly and clearly why he had vanished. Colleagues spoke in his support. The entertainment press, the same press that had turned his lowest photographed moment into a mass-shared joke, pivoted almost entirely. The narrative around Brendan Fraser didn't just change. It reversed. And carefully, at his own pace, the work started coming back. He began with voice acting, lending his voice to a character in Doom Patrol who had been through catastrophic physical trauma and was learning, painfully and imperfectly, how to exist inside a body that no longer felt entirely his own. It was a small role, but it was a beginning. And then came the role that would become the axis point of the entire second half of his career. Darren Aronofsky's film The Whale, adapted from a celebrated stage play, told the story of a man named Charlie, 600 pounds, an English teacher living in complete self-imposed isolation, estranged from his daughter, spending what he understood to be his final days, trying in whatever way he could to make amends for the failures he felt most deeply. Charlie refused to show his face on camera during his online classes. He was ashamed of what he had become. He existed behind closed doors, hidden from a world he no longer believed he had any right to participate in. When Fraser read the script, something in the material connected to him at a level that went beyond craft or professional calculation. He had spent nearly 2 decades behind his own closed doors. He understood in his body what it felt like to be ashamed of the distance between who you were and who you used to be. He He knew what it meant to carry weight, physical weight, emotional weight, invisible weight, that the outside world couldn't see and wouldn't have recognized if it could. He knew what it cost to finally make the decision to stop hiding. He understood Charlie from the inside, and he played him from there. The performance Fraser delivered in The Whale was unlike anything in his previous work. No action sequences. No charm deployed as a shield. No physicality as entertainment. Just a man completely exposed, reaching toward connection in whatever time he had left, and doing it with an honesty that was almost uncomfortable to witness. When the film premiered at the Venice Film Festival in September of 2022, the audience gave Brendan Fraser a standing ovation that lasted 6 minutes. He wept. Not the controlled, photogenic tears of a prepared acceptance speech. Real tears. The kind that come when something that has been held under enormous pressure for an enormous amount of time is finally, irrevocably released. There is no performance in a moment like that. It's just a person. And then on March 12th of 2023, Brendan Fraser stood on the stage of the Dolby Theatre in Hollywood and accepted the Academy Award for Best Actor. In his acceptance speech, he talked about his 30 years in the industry. He talked about how things hadn't come easily. He spoke about a time when the facility he had, the ease of it, the instinct of it, the simple joy of stepping in front of a camera and doing the work, had stopped. He described being in recovery. He described being held up by the people who loved him. His sons were in the audience that night. Meanwhile, the machine that had silenced him was coming apart. Philip Burke was expelled from the association in 2021 following publicly reported racially insensitive comments that finally created enough external pressure for the organization's board to act. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association itself was dissolved in 2023. The Golden Globes were transferred to new ownership. An organization that had operated as something like a shadow government inside Hollywood for multiple decades simply ceased to exist in the form that had made it dangerous. There was no dramatic trial. No public reckoning proportional to the scale of the damage that had been done. Just a quiet institutional collapse, which is perhaps the most Hollywood possible ending for a Hollywood villain. But Brendan Fraser's ending was something different entirely. He didn't return because the industry felt guilty. He didn't win because Hollywood decided to extend generosity towards someone it had wronged. He came back because he found a role that demanded every scar he had accumulated across 20 years of silence and pain and survival. And he gave it everything he had left. That's not a comeback story in any conventional sense. That's something rarer and considerably harder. That is survival transformed into art. Brendan Fraser spent 20 years being silenced by a system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of everyone else. And in the end, he outlasted every single one of them. The question now, the one that matters most, is whether the system that produced Philip Burke and the Hollywood Foreign Press Association has actually changed. Or whether the same machinery is still running, just under a different name, with different people holding the same levers. I want to know what you think. Leave it in the comments. I read all of them. And if this is the kind of story that brought you here, the ones that go deeper than the headlines, the ones that actually deserve to be told completely, then make sure you are subscribed. More stories like this one are coming. I'll see you in the next one.